The retirement trap no one warned you about. It usually does not begin with panic. It begins with a number. A number on a retirement calculator. A number on a benefits estimate. A number on a year-end statement. That looked survivable 10 years ago. And now looks thin. Not catastrophic. Just thin. A little too thin for groceries. That cost more than they used to. A little too thin for insurance premiums. That never seemed to move backward. A little too thin for a retirement. That may last longer than anyone once expected. And that is how the trap works. Not with a dramatic collapse. Not with one terrifying headline. Not with a siren. It begins quietly. With the realization that the future you thought was funded may actually be dependent. Dependent on people you do not know. Dependent on policy you do not control. Dependent on arithmetic that has been getting worse for years. Most people think retirement risk begins when markets fall. It does not. It begins the moment you confuse a government promise with a private asset. Because for millions of Americans, the retirement system they trust most is not a pile of money with their name on it. It is not a vault. It is not a private contract. It is not a guaranteed reservoir of capital waiting patiently for old age. It is a transfer system, a political commitment, a moving target. And when the math tightens, promises do not always break all at once. They weaken. Quietly. Legally. Gradually. Until one day, what felt like a safety net starts to look more like a trap. This is not a prediction of collapse. It is an examination of structure. The United States is not Greece. It is not Argentina. It is not Japan. But pressure has a grammar. And across systems, it often rhymes. In 2025, Social Security's trustees said the combined trust funds were projected to pay full scheduled benefits only until 2034. After that, if nothing changes, about 81% would still be payable. The old age fund alone was projected to reach depletion in 2033, with about 77% payable. At that point, that does not mean checks vanish overnight. It means something more uncomfortable. It means the assumptions beneath the promise are under strain. And once you understand that distinction, you stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, will they save it? Of course they will try to save it. The better question is, what exactly am I depending on? Because most people carry around a mental picture of retirement security that is far more solid than reality. They imagine contributions stacking up somewhere, protected, segregated, waiting. They imagine a long hallway of paychecks behind them, and at the end of that hallway, a door with their name on it. Behind the door, their money, their benefits, their retirement. That is the emotional model. It is also the wrong model. A transfer system does not work like a private vault. It works like a relay. Money comes in. Money goes out. Today's workers support today's beneficiaries. Tomorrow's workers are expected to do the same. For you, that sounds technical. But it is not technical at all. It is the entire story. Because once your retirement becomes dependent on the earning power, the tax base, and the political tolerance of the next generation, you are no longer relying on savings alone. You are relying on a living system under pressure, and the legal structure points in the same direction. The Supreme Court made clear long ago that Social Security does not function like a private annuity contract that you fully own. In the ordinary sense, that does not mean the promise is meaningless. It means the promise is political, and a political promise is not the same thing as an owned asset. That is the first misunderstanding. The second is even more dangerous. The system many people still imagine was built for a younger country. A country with more workers relative to retirees. A country where retirement was shorter. A country where age-related obligations had not yet swollen into something this large, this durable, this hard to reverse. The historical shift is stark. In 1950, there were 16.5 covered workers for every Social Security beneficiary. By 1960, that number had fallen to 5.1. Today, it is only a fraction of that. That does not automatically equal disaster, but it tells you something crucial. The base holding up the promise is narrower now, much narrower. And once a system like this is established, narrowing matters more than most people realize. Because a transfer system can tolerate stress for a long time. It can bend. It can postpone. It can refinance pressure through politics, taxation, borrowing, inflation, and gradual rule changes. What it cannot do is magically recover the world it was designed for. That world is gone. And yet, the emotional language around retirement still comes from that older world. Security, protection, guarantee, earned benefit, safety net. Words like these calm people. They make the structure feel more settled than it really is. But systems do not become sound because the language around them is comforting. They become sound when the math beneath them is strong. And this is where the retirement trap becomes more than a budgeting problem. It becomes a political trap, because every serious reform hurts someone in the present. Raise the retirement age, and workers feel cheated. Raise payroll taxes, and younger households feel squeezed. Cut scheduled benefits, and retirees feel betrayed. Means test too aggressively, and the middle class discovers it paid in for decades, only to be told the rules change at the finish line. No politician enjoys carrying that message into an election. So governments do what governments usually do when the right answer is painful and the easier answer is temporary. They delay. They soften the language. They make smaller adjustments than the math requires. They buy time in increments, and delay feels humane in the short term. That is why it is politically attractive. But in systems like this, delay is not neutral. Delay compounds. The adjustment that is too painful this year becomes larger next year. The reform avoided in one cycle returns in the next, heavier, harder, and more expensive to sell. The gap between what is politically acceptable and what is mathematically necessary slowly widens. And then people make a third mistake. They wait for the cut to look like a cut. They imagine retirement systems fail theatrically. A frozen payment system, a national emergency, an obvious rupture. Sometimes history gives countries scenes like that. But more often, the adjustment arrives in softer clothing. A formula changes. An eligibility rule tightens. An age threshold moves. A cost of living adjustment lags reality Taxes rise a little. Benefits grow more slowly. Purchasing power decays, while the nominal promise remains intact. This is one reason retirement disappointment often does not feel like betrayal. At first, it feels like budgeting. It feels like clipping coupons. Later in life, it feels like skipping trips. It feels like postponing dental work. It feels like telling your grown children you cannot help as much as you thought you could. It feels like rerunning the numbers every few months and noticing that the margin of dignity is narrowing. You still receive the check. The problem is that the life you thought the check would protect keeps getting more expensive. The system does not need to deny your benefit to reduce your retirement. It only needs to let your purchasing power erode. And this is why the deepest trap is not purely financial. It is psychological. People hear the word contribution and imagine property. They hear the word entitlement and imagine a contract. They hear decades of payroll taxes and imagine a claim no politician could ever touch. But systems like this survive precisely because governments retain the power to change them. That flexibility is not a flaw. It is one of the reasons the structure can endure strain at all, which means the average worker can spend decades believing they are building certainty, when what they are really building is exposure to future policy. Not exposure to one villain. Not exposure to one corrupt official. Exposure to a system that must keep adapting to realities no one vote can fully reverse. Longer lives. Fewer workers relative to beneficiaries. Higher legacy obligations. A political class rewarded for postponement. A public that prefers optimism to arithmetic until the arithmetic becomes unavoidable. At this point, the usual reassurance appears. The economy will grow. Maybe. Growth helps almost every fiscal problem at the margin. But growth is not a magic solvent. It does not repeal demographics. It does not erase longevity. It does not dissolve promises already made. Another reassurance follows. Technology will fix productivity. Perhaps it will improve productivity. But even stronger productivity does not remove the political problem. Someone still has to absorb the adjustment. Workers, through higher taxes. Retirees, through lower real benefits. Future households, through debt and debasement. Or some mixture of all three. That is what makes this a trap, rather than a simple policy challenge. The costs are real. The beneficiaries are real. The promises are politically sacred. And the corrections are always easier to describe in theory than to impose in public. So what does this mean for the individual? It does not mean panic. It does not mean nihilism. It does not mean pretending Social Security is worthless. It is not worthless. It means something more disciplined. It means reducing dependence. Because the people most exposed to retirement fragility are often not the poorest and not the wealthiest. They are the middle. The disciplined, responsible middle. The households built on a narrow beam of assumptions. Social Security will cover this much. The market will return that much. The house will hold its value. Healthcare will remain manageable. Work will end on schedule. Inflation will cool. Congress will fix anything that becomes too dangerous. This is how a fragile plan can look responsible, right up until it does not. Real resilience begins when you stop treating retirement as a number alone and start treating it as a structure. Not just how much you have, how dependent you are, how many fixed obligations follow you into older age, how much liquidity you have when life does not cooperate, how flexible your spending really is, how long you could keep earning if you had to, how much of your future relies on one institution, one asset class, one policy regime, one version of the economy, continuing without interruption. That is a better question than most retirement advertising wants you to ask, because a glossy projection is emotionally satisfying. Resilience is usually less glamorous. Resilience looks like lower fixed costs, less debt entering old age, a wider margin for health shocks, more optionality, a life designed to break less violently when assumptions fail. The strongest retirement plan is not the one with the prettiest chart. It is the one that remains livable under disappointment. That may be the least marketable truth in personal finance, but it is closer to reality. The retirement trap no one warned you about is not a single event. It is a long misunderstanding. A misunderstanding about what was saved. A misunderstanding about what was guaranteed. A misunderstanding about how long the old math could carry the old promise. A misunderstanding about the difference between stability and ownership. None of this means the system disappears tomorrow. It means dependence has a cost, and that cost rises when demographics harden, when budgets tighten, and when politics falls behind arithmetic. The people hurt most are rarely the reckless. They are usually the compliant, the ones who worked, contributed, followed the script, trusted the language, and discovered too late that a public promise is strongest when conditions are easy, and weakest when it is needed most. That is not cynicism. It is structure. And the point of seeing the structure is not despair. It is clarity. Because once you see the structure, you stop building your future on comforting language alone. You stop confusing scheduled with untouchable. You stop confusing paid in with fully owned. You stop confusing delay with repair. And in an era like this, clarity is not pessimism. It is a form of self-defense. If you want to understand what still holds when the old assumptions begin to fail, stay here. This channel studies the pressure points before they become headlines.